Hello, I'm Clinical Professor Jamie Lau, the Supervising Attorney for Duke Law's Wrongful Convictions Clinic, and Deputy Director of the Center for Criminal Justice and Professional Responsibility. And today, I'm your host for this episode of the Duke Law Podcast. In 2001, a jury in Central North Carolina convicted Quincy Amerson for the first-degree murder of 7-year-old Sharita Rivera. A motorist found the child's body lying dead on a country road in the early morning hours of August 7th, 1999. Later that day, police discovered her mother, Patrice, stabbed to death at their home just miles away. Quincy lived 2 doors down from the Riveras and soon became the exclusive focus of the police investigation into Sharita's death. Armed with a faulty crime scene reconstruction and prejudicial testimony based on that reconstruction, prosecutors convinced the jury in Harnett County to find Quincy guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the next 2 decades, Quincy held on to hope and fought to clear his name. Working with the Wrongful Convictions Clinic, Quincy's conviction was overturned and he was exonerated 22 years later. On March 13, 2024, he walked out of prison a free man. Today, I am honored to be joined by Quincy and Duke Law Professor Jim Coleman, who is Quincy's lead attorney from the clinic. Jim is my esteemed colleague and friend, and is the John S. Bradway Distinguished Professor of Practice of the Law and Director of the Wrongful Convictions Clinic. I am also joined by Luke Mears, a recent graduate of Duke Law who worked on Quincy's case as a student. Welcome, Jim and Quincy. Thank you for being here today.
Hey, glad to be here, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Quincy, I'm going to start with you. Before we dig into the case and what went wrong, I want to ask you, how are you doing and how are you readjusting being free today?
Doing good as to be expected, man. It hasn't really been a hard transformation. I had a lot of, little backing, and people that, lending a helping hand or whatever, try to get me back in shape, man. But, I've been doing what I have to do.
I imagine you've been hanging out with family?
Family, that's about it. Family, my kids, nieces, nephews. That's the only thing I really thought about while I was gone. So, that's what I've been doing the last couple of months. I can't get enough of that.
Well, we're glad you're here and glad you've had the opportunity to be with family for the months you've been free.
I appreciate you.
Jim, glad we get to talk about this case. I mean, we usually talk about this case in meetings as we're trying to strategize, but This is the great opportunity we have to talk about a case after Quincy's home and free. But can you just start by telling us a little bit about what went wrong in this case and what happened on August 7th, 1999?
Yeah, this was a case where a 7-year-old girl was found dead in the middle of a road in Harnett County, North Carolina. A woman who was on the way to the airport at around 4:15 a.m. Saw the body in the road. She stopped. She called the police and the EMS, and the police began an investigation. During the investigation, the next morning, they discovered that the little girl's mother had been murdered in her bed about 3 miles away. And instead of focusing on that homicide, for some reason, the law enforcement officials decided to focus on the little girl's death. They believed, with no evidence to support it, that her death had been intentional. And so they decided to focus on her death as an intentional homicide. And when they started to do a canvass of the neighborhood, they talked to Quincy, who lived in the same neighborhood as Sharita and her mother, Patrice. And they then began to focus on him as the primary suspect in the case because they believed that it was a single car incident and that Quincy was the driver of that single car.
Why did they believe Quincy was the driver of that single car?
when Quincy had been driving that night in his girlfriend's car, and she had taken the car to Charlotte for a wedding. She returned on Sunday, I believe, and they inspected the car. They wanted to see the car that he had been driving. And when they looked at it, they saw underneath that there was blood and flesh. They put it up on a rack and decided that the car had been used to run over a person. And they assumed that the person was Sharita and that Quincy, therefore, was the person who had killed her.
Now, you said they also thought it was a single car incident. Did you learn whether that was true or not while the clinic had the case?
Yeah, well, that was one of the first things that we looked at. There were actually two cars that they knew about, Quincy's car and the last car to hit her. And they knew about that car because the witness who had called the law enforcement was present when the last car ran over the little girl. So they were able to identify that person. Sort of interesting, they spent a lot of time examining the car, but it was clear when they ran over the little girl that she was already dead. So there was no suggestion that the last car to run over her was the car that had killed her. But as we looked into the case, we started to find other cars that had run over her, including one that the police knew about before they arrested Quincy. The problem was that all of them didn't know, and the two detectives who arrested Quincy weren't aware of this third car that had run over the body.
Quincy, I want to bring you back in for a moment. Now, you're listening to Jim detail the investigation or lack of investigation in your case, and you were convicted of intentional homicide in 2001. As you were convicted, what did you feel in those moments? What were you thinking as you went to trial and then were convicted?
It was sickening, man, because, we sat in there and heard all this so-called evidence, which, really didn't amount to nothing, and then just, to be found guilty like that, man, it was horrific. I couldn't believe it. I was upset, highly angered or whatever, but, at the end of the day, I knew I had to keep pushing on. I had, we had talked about, with my attorneys that I had, if anything went wrong, I knew I had a chance for appeal. And I knew nothing else, they could pull up nothing on me, that could link me to this case, nothing like that. So, even though I was angered or whatever and stuff, my main objective was to try to find lawyers that could help me get back out. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't worried about standing there for life, even though they gave me life or nothing like that, because I knew, I was not guilty. You know what I'm saying? And I knew that eventually it would come out.
Did you imagine it taking 22 years before it came out? I thought
after I got found, good maybe 2 or 3 years to go by, maybe. And it kept going on and on and on. 2 or 3 years go by, and everything's going good, and it's a backslide, and everything's going good again, and it's a backslide. So I didn't imagine it taking nowhere near 20-some years.
How did you keep hope through all this?
Man, I just, just knowing the facts, man. I said, man, there's nowhere in the world that they can't, find the truth. I just felt like the truth would come out eventually. You know what I'm saying? And then once I got, the guys here at Duke, involved or whatever, and everything just started coming alive, coming to the table. You know what I'm saying? So I felt at ease after I got them working on it. You know what I'm saying?
So Jim, Quincy felt at ease once you joined the case. When did you first learn about the case and decide that Quincy was innocent and that you were going to take this on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure exactly. Quincy may remember when we first showed up. I think it was around 2007 or 8. Yeah,
right around that time.
Right, that's what I thought. But we looked at the case, and I don't remember whether Quincy contacted us or whether.
Yeah,
right. Okay. So we then pulled some of the records that we could get right away, looked at the evidence. We looked at the opinion on appeal. It seemed very thin. The evidence that the court pointed to as pointing toward Quincy as the person who had killed the little girl was not convincing. And then we realized that this whole case had been based on a reconstruction done by a highway patrol officer who had no real experience doing reconstructions, and particularly multi-car reconstructions. So we thought at that point that there's a substantial likelihood that he was not guilty of the murder.
So a crime scene reconstruction seems fairly reliable, something that a jury could potentially hang its hat on.
Quincy
wants to weigh in. What?
Now, I want to say about the reconstructions, the one in the so-called reconstruction, supposed to did the reconstruction. He was friends of one of the family members also that had hit the body. And then, he just brushed it on the rug and didn't say anything about it. And this is how all this other stuff, transpired.
So the state trooper who did the reconstruction was a friend of one of the other drivers of the vehicle that ran over Sharita.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh,
that's a really good point, and we didn't make a lot of it because that wasn't going to get the conviction overturned. But the third car that the state knew about before they arrested Quincy was of this kid whose family knew the highway patrol officer who did the reconstruction, and he didn't report it to the State Bureau of Investigation or to the Harnett County Sheriff's Department until about 4 months after they had arrested and charged Quincy. But the whole thing was just bogus. Ordinarily, you would think that, one thinks that a reconstruction of an accident is scientific and that the conclusions based on a reconstruction are valid. And that's ordinarily true when you have a simple 1 or 2 car incident. You can identify the cars that were involved. You can point to the evidence that you collect at the scene. You can connect or link evidence that you collect to the cars that were involved. If you're able to do that, then you can create a narrative based on where you found the evidence. You can say, this is what happened. Car A did this, car B did that. The problem in this case was that they couldn't do that. They didn't know all of the cars that had run over the little girl, and they couldn't link any of the evidence that they found to Quincy's car, and they didn't really make an effort to try to link it to other cars.
Quincy, you just heard Jim describe the bogus crime scene reconstruction that was introduced at your trial. As you're sitting there at trial, I'm curious how you felt when you were hearing this evidence. And I also want to ask you, did you ever imagine that the state would put on such bogus evidence? Yes, to secure your conviction?
Never imagined it, man. I never saw it I don't know. It was terrible what happened. But at the same time, hearing what he was saying, the evidence he was putting on, I just still felt like that I was going to, beat the case. I felt like I was going to go home that day. So while I was sitting up there and I was hearing this guy say this stuff, about this reconstruction, I was telling myself, well, 30 more minutes, because I hadn't heard nothing that could convict me. And I knew it was not going to be nothing that could convict me. So, I can't say I was upset. I was upset, hearing what he was saying, but I can't say that I felt nervous, scary, or anything. Because anybody that would have been in there and heard the evidence that was put on probably would have felt the same way I felt. I don't know. I guess it was just the place I was at. I don't know. I don't know what happened, man. I really don't know what went wrong, man. It wasn't supposed to happen.
Now, Jim, you described the problems with this crime scene reconstruction, that it focused on a single car, didn't give consideration to the possibility that multiple cars. How did the reconstruction play into the work of the Wrongful Convictions Clinic? What did the clinic do to refute the evidence that was presented? Because a reconstruction seems like it can be persuasive evidence to a juror in a case.
Well, not only could it be, but it obviously was in this case. One of the things that we haven't mentioned is that there was also a jailhouse snitch who claimed that Quincy confessed that he had kidnapped the little girl, taken her down to where she died, drove over her multiple times until she was dead. And he testified. And even the prosecutors acknowledged during closing argument that the jury might not find him credible. And indeed, they didn't. They acquitted Quincy on kidnapping and felony murder charges. That was really important, because if they had convicted him of kidnapping, it would have been a very different case that we had to deal with. Once that witness, though, was eliminated from the case, all we were left with was the reconstruction. So what we did was to develop all of the facts that we could about each piece of evidence on which the reconstruction was based. And then we started to interview reconstruction experts in North Carolina to ask them to look at the reconstruction and to give us an opinion about the methodology and about the conclusions. And as we started to do that, we then sort of expanded out into the country. We sent 2 students to Chicago to interview a person who taught reconstruction to a lot of police agencies. And everybody agreed that this was not a proper reconstruction, primarily because the person was not able to link the evidence to Quincy's car.
Now, Luke, I want to bring you in here. As a student working on this case, can you tell our listeners what it was, the role you played in this case, what work you did in this case as a student?
Thank you so much, Professor Lau. I think by the time that me and the other student who worked on this case, Sam Bettini, joined, the case was really gearing up for litigation. A lot of the students who worked on the case before us focused a lot on investigations and interviewing witnesses and chasing down leads to put information into the motion we would file. When the case ultimately was at a stage where Sam and I joined, we had just filed the motion for appropriate relief and had gotten to discovery, and so we would be preparing for depositions. That was a large amount of work that we did early on. After the depositions, which we took 4 of them, we compiled all of the responses into an amendment to the motion we put at first. So for any filings and large writings we would do, we would take the first stab at writing it. Professor Coleman would give us a lot of edits, and we would incorporate them, send them back and forth, and then ultimately file them with the court. One of the largest projects that I got to work on, which was a real highlight of law school, was preparing for and then arguing a motion to decide the case as a matter of law. And so, we mooted that, worked on the preparation for that. And so that was a really rewarding experience to deliver that argument in front of the judge. And those are really the main projects, but I think one of the most enjoyable parts of this case was getting experience to just such a variety of tasks. Random research questions would come up while writing, and we would do that, creating timelines of all the interviews to prep for the depositions, writing to Quincy, making sure that he knew what we were doing and was in the loop. It really spanned a large spectrum, but all of them really contributed to learning a lot, and really feeling like we were part of the team and making an impact on the case.
Thank you, Luke. I want to turn back to you, Quincy. The time from your conviction in 2001, the long road before your exoneration on March 10th, 2024. How did you pass all that time while you were in prison? What did you do to keep your mind occupied and to keep yourself sane? Because I imagine that was a difficult period.
Yes, it was. A lot of times, man, I worked out, man, read books, that sort of thing. There's not too much you can do in there, man. Keep your mind off stuff or whatever. But I took a few classes while I was in there, computer classes and stuff like that. Things that could try to better myself or whatever. 'Cause I knew I was going to do something when I got out here. But that's pretty much it, man. Mostly my passion was working out in there. It kept my mind off a lot of things, man. And, just studying, man, reading, that type of thing. Ain't much to get into, but trouble if you're not doing that sort of thing.
Any particular book that you found meaningful while you were
I read a lot of books, but the meaningful books was the business books I was ordering, trucking companies, CDLs, stuff like that. That's what I was trying to get into. That's what I'm trying to get into now, So that's where my time was, especially the last few years. The first few years, I was just mad at the world, so I was just in stuff, you know what I'm saying? But, I knew that wouldn't really get me nowhere, so I had to sit down and take a step back and reevaluate things. And I just, like I said, I just had to sit down, man. And
so that's
it worked out.
That's interesting to me. The books that you found most meaningful were those that were preparing you for your freedom.
That's right.
But you had a life in prison without the possibility of parole sentence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were you able to see hope?
I was. I never gave up.
And what helped you see that hope while you were incarcerated?
Man, prayer, man. My family, everyone, man. The whole time I've been gone, I had a good fan base, so I could call home and get on the phone to people. Some people don't have that, but I could call home and get on the phone, talk to anybody in my family, uplift my spirits, and I go on a few more weeks, a few months, and that helps out a lot.
Now, we were talking before this interview, and your father, it was his birthday.
Yeah, 2 days.
5 days after you were released, is that right?
Yeah, we had about 3 days, something like that. Yeah, and he came to pick me up.
Tell me about that birthday celebration.
Man, we had a good time, man. We just sat around. It was just all family, a lot of family, man. Probably about 30 or 40 of us in a yard, like a yard party. And we just sat and had a good time, man, and caught up. That was the best feeling ever, man, being out.
Was it everything you imagined in that time?
And more, yeah. I'm talking about to this day, I really can't see too far past being with my family right now. That's about it.
So, Quincy, while you were incarcerated, did you allow your mind to go to what it would be like if you were to be free? How you would spend that time?
Yeah.
Free?
Yeah, I thought about that nonstop. Like I said, after the first few years or whatever, like I knew it would come. It'll come to an end or whatever and stuff. Now, honestly, the first few years I was in, man, I was just mad. So I was just in stuff, getting in trouble, this and that. But, after a while, man, I realized, man, I said, man, I'm not going to be in here. I'm going to mess around, get in trouble, and be in here for something I did do, and be discharged and just be stuck in here. So that's when I started applying myself, man, taking those classes, you know what I'm saying? Computer applications, concept, that type of thing, or whatever. I started studying for, CDLs. I started ordering all the business, trucking businesses, stuff like that. And I just started writing down different things I wanted to venture out in. And I look forward to doing that now, I've been trying to make all the necessary, preparation and talk to different people about different things I want to do. Trucks, one of my main things. So I kind of always wanted to drive one, but I want drivers, rental cars, different stuff.
Well, I want to come back. I have a few questions about how you hope to spend your future. But let me go back to Jim and figure out how this all came to an end and how your freedom was ultimately won. So, Jim, the clinic's been working on this case, I think you said maybe 2007, 2008. You've sent students flying through the country to interview accident reconstruction experts. I imagine you found the best qualified people that were available anywhere through that process. What ultimately happened that resulted in Quincy's freedom and his ability to be here today?
Well, we knew early on in our investigation that the key was the reconstruction. So we focused on that. We interviewed all of the witnesses. We talked to the analysts at the State Bureau of Investigation about the tests that they had done on the evidence, trying to established that they were not able to link any of the evidence directly to Quincy's car. We talked to the best reconstructionists in North Carolina, but they wouldn't allow us to hire them because they all had relationships with law enforcement agencies. They trained the Highway Patrol agency, and so they were not willing to become a witness against the agencies on whose business they depended. So we found a reconstructionist in Pennsylvania, a young guy, Sean Harrington, who had not done, I don't think he had done a criminal case, but he was very good on the science of reconstruction. I went up and met with him. He was actually one of our students found him. I went up and met with him, talked to him. He came down to North Carolina. He went over to the scene. He brought his drone, and he did a write-up of his conclusions. And it all made sense. It was straightforward, understandable. And so we got him to do a formal report, which we circulated. And then on the basis of his report, we filed a motion for appropriate relief. And eventually, we forced the state to have to respond to our attack on the reconstruction. They went out and talked to the head of the State Bureau of Investigation's Reconstruction Unit, and he concluded that, exactly as Sean had concluded, that it was a bogus reconstruction. It didn't follow a scientific method, and that the analysis did not support the conclusion. To her credit, the prosecutor, as soon as she got that report back, she told us about it. I think there are some prosecutors who would not have done that, but she didn't wait until February when we were scheduled to have a hearing. She told us and the judge right away that her expert said that the reconstruction did not support the conviction. We then had an evidentiary hearing just on that issue, and she effectively conceded that the conviction had to be overturned.
So you described a lot of steps leading to her eventual conclusion that the conviction should be overturned. Mm-hmm. What role did Duke Law students play throughout this entire process that led to Quincy's freedom?
They were a part of the team that did the investigation. I was the lead lawyer, and they were the subordinate lawyers. They did everything that we did in the case. They were involved in. We convinced the judge to let us take depositions of the law enforcement officials who had investigated the case. And Luke and Sam took depositions. They helped to draft motions. They argued in case. They did everything that a lawyer would have done in the case. And they were really outstanding. I think the judge was impressed with them. I think the prosecutor was impressed with them. And it was, for me, it was very satisfying watching them work. Watch them take depositions, watch them to prepare to take depositions. A lot of times the preparation is the key to a lot of what we do. And I think, they were highly motivated and self-motivated to do the best preparation possible, and it was reflected in the work product.
Now I come back to you, Luke, because I witnessed some of the work you did on the case. And at times it appeared that you were the lead lawyer I can say. What did it mean for you to be a part of this case? And what did you learn as someone aspiring to have a practice of your own upon graduation?
Oh, thank you, Professor Lau. I really appreciate that. Um, I think it borders cliche to say that this was the most rewarding experience of law school, overall, but it would be inaccurate to say otherwise. I think the tangible skills gained, being able to take a deposition is something that really forms going into a law firm or a legal career, being able to have experience, presenting an argument and making filings to the court. That, the skills gained in that are really valuable for what they are. But more than that, I think it really showed how important the client is. You know, Managing that relationship and making sure that they're in the loop with the arguments that you're making and the strategy and that their thoughts are incorporated. And throughout this whole thing, I think some of my favorite moments were, the car rides with Professor Coleman and Sam and the other students, or the lunches we would have afterwards, and just getting to ask questions about the legal field and what makes a good lawyer. I think those kind of informal lessons, which were really possible with just how great of a mentor Professor Coleman was throughout this whole experience. I think those are really what I'll take into practice as much as any tangible skills. Being a good person and seeing how that can make you a good and better lawyer, I would say is kind of the overall lesson. And then kind of relating to this case specifically, just how important it is to stay focused on obtaining justice and not giving up. I think that's kind of unique to the area of wrongful convictions more per se than general areas of law, but seeing how much the justice system could fail, and what, how much work really has to happen to overcome that. Uh, I hope, stays with a lot of people and guides a lot of the decisions that people make in the future.
And now, so the DA has agreed that the reconstruction report itself was invalid. That should put a wrap to this case, shouldn't it? What happened after the DA ultimately had agreed with the clinic?
Yeah, so I said to her credit, she told us right away what her expert thought about the evidence. To her discredit, she allowed Quincy to remain in prison while she claimed to consider whether she would bring charges, would prosecute him again on the murder charge. And, it was clear that that was never going to happen. All of the investigators in the case admitted that they were never able to show that Quincy had caused the little girl's death. They were never able to show that this was a homicide as opposed to an accident. So there was no chance that they could have retried him. What we asked them to do in light of that was to allow Quincy to leave prison immediately on his self-recognizance, and then she could decide, take a week or whatever she needed to decide whether she would retry him. We knew there was no chance of that, but she refused to do that. And then the judge started to talk about whether or not we needed a bail hearing in light of the fact that he had a murder charge against him. But what happened eventually was that he was in state prison. They transferred him to the county jail because he was no longer under a sentence that permitted him to be in state prison. And as soon as they transferred him back to the county jail, she notified us that she had signed the documents dismissing the case.
So just to make this clear for our listeners, Quincy, your conviction was vacated in April. Mm-hmm. You had no conviction. Right. As of the date in April, the judge signed the papers that vacated the conviction, but there was still a pending first-degree murder charge lodged against you. And there was this period of time between April and before your release in March that you were in prison, no longer convicted as a first-degree murderer, but you were just waiting to figure out if the state was going to retry you. How did you feel during that period of time when you knew your conviction had been vacated, but here you are, still sitting in prison,
I was
yet
furious.
to be free?
Man, I was furious about that, man. I'm like, what in the world? I couldn't believe that it could happen. I didn't know how it happened. You know, I was like, there's no way in the world. I'm telling myself, there's no way in the world that they could retry me. What in the world? You know, it's one thing after another. So I'm like, you know, the only thing I knew was the charges, it had been overturned, and that was enough at the time. 24 years. So when they say it's overturned, that's all I needed to hear for that time, at that time, you know what I'm saying? I was upset now sitting there waiting for 2-3 months for her to go ahead and release me, but it was music to my ears, and they said they finally overturned it.
Now tell me about your release. You were released on March 13th.
From the county.
Now, how did that process work?
They took me in from prison, from the prison to the county, and I stayed up front, like in the lobby, man. Like I'm sitting there with no handcuffs on and nothing, looking at the door. They take me back to a cell. I don't even know I'm getting out. So I'm back there in the cell. I'm back there like 15 to 20 minutes, mad because I know the court date was for like a couple of weeks out, and I'm like, I got to sit in this county for weeks now to wait to go to court. And then they finally took like 15, 20 minutes went by, and they came and told me to pack my stuff. And I was like, where am I going? And the dude, he was like, I don't know, but you're not staying here. So now I packed the stuff. I went to the lobby. I'm like, what block am I going? I thought I was going to another block. And they was like, now you ready to get out. My heart started beating so fast. Whew.
So you had no idea.
I didn't even know I was getting out that day.
Yeah. Do you remember what you told me on the phone about this?
What?
You said you were standing there thinking, do I run before they can take this away?
I got ready to get out of there. Yeah. I was ready to go. I said, where's the phone? The phone. Let me get the phone. Called my ride, and I left. I left walking through the parking lot.
So you didn't wait for your ride?
No.
So where'd your ride pick you up?
Man, they way up the road, like from my father. I called my father, come and get me. And when he came, I was waving my hands. Over here.
Let me ask you this. Did you think there was a safe enough distance that you can put between you and that jail?
No, that's why I was still walking when he came.
Now you've got as far away from the station as you can.
Right.
You have a ride coming, and at some moment it had to dawn on you, I'm free. Mm-hmm. When that realization came to you, how did you feel in that moment?
Honestly, man, it was a nervous feeling, man. When I left out of that county, and I was standing around for a minute after I called my ride, I started looking around. I said, man, I wonder if they made a mistake. My heart was beating fast. I was nervous, sweating. I said, I'm getting away. And I started walking. And I don't know, man, it was just too much at one time, man. I probably could have passed out.
So let me take you a little bit further away from that moment to your parents' home that night. Because I know your dad picked you up. Now you're sitting there, I'm just gonna imagine this and you can tell me if it's true. You're sitting there at your mom's kitchen table. You're looking over, there's your dad, there's your mother. Don't know if any other family members were there. A lot of family members. How did you feel just sitting at that table, knowing you were free, knowing you were with your family?
Yeah, I kind of felt out of place at first, man. I mean, and it was overwhelming. Everybody was coming. Some people was crying. People was hugging. I might have shed a tear or two. I don't know, man. It was too much emotion, man. But, you know, like after that first couple of days, everything like panned out. You know, I had people dragging me this way, good people, my family, you know, dragging me this way, that way, you know, trying to, you know, catch me up on what I missed. And then, you know, I missed a lot in 20-some years, you know. So, I mean, like I said, I think that was the best thing that could happen, man, just the family being there and friends. But, man, I don't know, man, I don't even know how to describe that feeling, man. I was saying to myself, man, I hope these people ain't made no mistake, you know, this and that. I got to get away. That was where my mind was at.
Now, I want to come back to and ask you a few more questions about freedom and how that transition's been. But before, I want to just turn back to Jim. And my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that one of the greatest tragedies in this whole situation was that Patrice Rivera undoubtedly was murdered in her home that night, and no one was ever charged with that murder. Quincy was never charged with that murder. Is it true that that murder remains unsolved and has yet to be fully investigated? And how do you see that murder and Sharita's death coming together? How are those two things related in your eyes? And if a listener's hearing about Sharita deceased on the road, how do you believe she came to be deceased on the road that night?
Yeah, I think one of the, other than Quincy's wrongful convictions, one of the tragedies in this case was that they didn't investigate Patrice's death, the mother's death. And instead they focused on the little girl's death, which I believe was an accident. I think it was a hit and run accident. We thought that the most likely thing that happened was that while her mother was being murdered, she ran out of the house and ran down to the place where she was killed by a hit-and-run driver. I believe that that's what happened. And when we filed our motion for appropriate relief, we had done some research into other cases where little kids had witnessed their parents being killed, and they left the house and were picked up miles away. And we thought that's what happened in this case. The state, for whatever reason, never really investigated Patrice's death. And we always thought that was a injustice. So as we were representing Quincy, we were also trying to get evidence tested relating to Patrice. We had fingerprints that the killer likely left because they were bloody. We had them tested by the State Bureau of Investigation, and all of these things were done on our motions. The state, none of this was done on the state's initiative.
Go ahead. Can I just pause you for a moment? Because I want to clarify this. So at the scene where Patrice Rivera, is found deceased, there are prints in blood that were not Quincy's.
Correct.
They were not Patrice Rivera's.
Correct.
And yet somehow Quincy was charged with intentional homicide that night, and no effort was made to ever identify whose pranks those were?
Correct. We were the first to ask the SBI to compare the prints to another suspect whose name came up on the night that Patrice was killed, and while they tested the fingerprints against the state and federal database, they did not test it against the military database, even though there was a suspect who was involved in the military. One of the things that we have done recently, Luke and I, after Quincy was exonerated, Luke wrote a letter to the cold case unit in the Army at Fort Bragg, or whatever it's now called, Fort Liberty, and told them about the case. And then he and I, a week and a half ago, went to Quantico to meet with two representatives of the unit, and they are quite interested in in pursuing the case. They're going to investigate it from the perspective of the military in the event that this is some person with military connections. We were disappointed that they had already contacted some of the state law enforcement agencies and that they had not responded. So Luke sent a letter to some of our law enforcement agencies, including the Attorney General, the SBI, the Harnett County Sheriff, the Harnett County District Attorney, and asked them to cooperate with the military. And we hope that happens.
So you continue to pursue justice
Yes.
for Patrice Rivera.
Correct.
And
Correct.
Any thoughts on why? I know you can't speak for the investigators for the state in this case, but any thoughts on why it was that they never sought to identify whose pranks those were or to thoroughly investigate the death of Miss Rivera?
I have no idea. I mean, obviously you can speculate. I don't want to do that. I don't want to accuse people of something that may not have been the factor. But they seem to have no interest whatever in trying to identify the person who had killed Patrice Rivera. And we thought they had an obligation to do that. We thought they had an obligation to do that in 1999, and the obligation continued and continues today. So we hope that what we've done will at least get them to focus on that goal.
I mean, that's just, it shocks the conscience
Yep.
to think that law enforcement just disregards a homicide
Yep.
in their county
Yep.
Without explanation.
Nope.
Let's turn to more happy things, though. Quincy is here. Quincy is free. The first question I have for you is, what's been the hardest part of your transition to freedom, leaving prison, and trying to reacquaint yourself with your family, with the world as it is today, which I imagine looks a lot different than what the world looked like when you were first arrested back in the late 1990s?
Yeah, it does look a lot different, man. I can't really say I've been that challenged, man, because I had like people just watching over me and shit. And I thank God for that, But that, I can't say I really had any hard times, man. The first couple of nights out, I want to say that probably was the hardest time, just being out here. It was just a uneasy feeling. I don't know why, but I just didn't feel comfortable. But now, since I done spent a lot of time with everybody and been around and did this and did that and seen a few things and been involved in a few things, I think I think things went very well. The transformation went well. I feel real good. And I've been feeling that for a long time now, It didn't take long like I thought it would, because, prison messed people up, man, a lot. I've seen people lose their mind within 2 or 3 years, So you imagine 24 years, 23, 24 years.
How do you want to spend your future? Looking down the road, 5 years, where is Quincy Amerson 5 years?
Man, somewhere out traveling the country, man. I just want to see out as many countries as I can right now and just be there for my family, Well, I really just want to do something, man, to make my mom and dad proud before they leave, man. That's all. As far as me, I'm 50 years old now. I'm not a little spring chicken anymore. You know what I'm saying? I got a few good years left. I just want to travel a little bit, man. Travel with the family, and just, that's about it, man. And then that'll make my life complete right there.
Have you been able to travel?
Since I've been out, not out of the country, but out of the state. I've been to a few states already.
Where you been?
Georgia, stayed down there a few days. South Carolina, nothing real far.
You sticking around the Southeast.
Yeah, we around,
Okay.
I had some good times.
And what were you doing on those trips?
Georgia, I have a daughter that's 25 years old, and that's where she lives down there. Yeah, so I went down there and spent a few days with her. It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I held her one time before I went to prison, and I never let her come visit me in prison.
Any grandchildren?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to next.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can probably take them and raise them.
Well, that'll make you a grandpa.
That'll make me a grandpa.
How do you feel about that?
Real old.
Well, we are obviously very grateful.
Yeah, man, I am too for y'all, man. I appreciate it so much. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Well, I'd be lost. If it wasn't for y'all, I'd be lost, man. That was a long haul. And I went through a bunch of lawyers, you know what I'm saying? I went through a few lawyers, they sold the dream, did this and that, man. But I just thank God, that I finally, I reached out to y'all and he took over the case.
Do you know Jim Coleman's motto? Did he tell you his motto?
He motto yet. What is the motto?
Well, I mean, I tell our students that we never, 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 never give up.
Yeah. And they did, man.
And I told you that, right?
You did tell me that.
As long as you stayed out of trouble,
yeah,
so that they wouldn't have some real reason to keep you, that we were going to work to get your conviction overturned.
And when you told me that, I believed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I believed it.
Our clinic's viewpoint is if somebody's innocent and, we think that the innocent shows that you go to the mat for them because you've got to do everything you can to free that person.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining us today on the Duke Law Podcast and giving us this firsthand look into this powerful story.
Yeah, thank you, man. I'm happy to be here.
And to all our listeners, be sure to follow the Duke Law Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, go Duke.